Jacob Mchangama's think tank, The Future of Free Speech, practices pseudoscience and spreads EU propaganda. But before I demonstrate this in detail, let me make some introductory remarks. As we saw in our previous video, the Digital Services Act of the European Union censors only legal content. What it calls illegal content is nothing but legal content that is alleged to be illegal by social media companies. And allegedly illegal content is nothing but legal content by definition. The Digital Services Act, therefore, cannot possibly censor illegal posts. But in May of 2024, the think tank called The Future of Free Speech, led by its founder and executive director Jacob Mchangama, released a study called Preventing Torrents of Hate or Stifling Free Expression Online. This study analyzed a large number of deleted posts in Germany, France, and Sweden under the Digital Services Act. The study found that between 87.5% and 99.7% of all deleted comments, depending on the sample in this report, are in fact legal. The study further reports that in Germany, 99.7% and 98.9% of deleted comments were found to be legal on Facebook and YouTube, respectively. I can tell you right now that this is a bogus study, a piece of pseudoscience. The truth is the following. 100% of the deleted posts which this study analyzed were legal posts and nothing but legal posts. And yet, this study pretends that some illegal posts were included in their samples of deleted posts. How? Why? And what does it mean? Well, that is precisely what we shall find out today. So let us introduce the players. Jacob Mchangama is the executive director and founder of the Future of Free Speech. He is a research professor at Vanderbilt University and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE for short. The Future of Free Speech itself is an independent, non-partisan think tank located at Vanderbilt University. Its self-declared mission is to, quote, reaffirm freedom of expression as the bedrock of free and thriving societies through actionable research, empowering tools, and principled advocacy, end quote. My name is Andreas Seemann, and I am the managing director of the Alliance for Free Speech, called Bündnis Redefreiheit in German. We are a Swiss-based association which protects free speech in Switzerland and in Germany. Let us begin our critique. The Digital Services Act was passed as a law in 2022. In April 2023, the European Commission designated Facebook and YouTube as very large online platforms and declared that these companies will now have to comply, within 4 months, with the full set of new obligations under the DSA. The deadline for compliance, set in April by the Commission's minatory pronouncement, fell 4 months later in August, and the Commission's threatening tone made one thing clear: that hesitation would not be tolerated. Amongst the obligations which these companies had to comply with within 4 months was more diligent content moderation and less disinformation, so that platforms need to have a mechanism for users to flag illegal content and act upon notifications expeditiously. Faced with that kind of pressure, these companies did not wait for the clock to run out. They began to comply and to censor immediately, and censor they did. The Future of Free Speech's study comes between April and August 2023. This study gathered comments from 60 of the largest Facebook pages and YouTube channels in France, Germany, and Sweden, and tracked which comments disappeared within a 2-week period between June and July 2023. So, this study analyzed deleted posts to see whether they were legal or illegal. Just so we're clear, the study uses the words legally permissible and legal interchangeably as synonyms. The study found that between 87.5% and 99.7% of all deleted comments, depending on the sample in this report, are in fact legal. That's almost 100%, which is quite remarkable. That means that less than 12.5% of deleted comments were illegal or classified as illegal. My question is, how did this study identify posts as illegal? Let us remember our fundamental premise from our previous videos on the DSA. It is a fundamental premise of the Enlightenment itself. The premise is, everything is legal until a court or judge has ruled it to be illegal. So, did the Future of Free Speech investigate whether any judge ruled the illegal comments which the study identified to actually be illegal? No, of course not. They had no need of judges to determine illegality. They had something far more useful. They had legal experts. These legal experts, each more or less familiar with the laws of Germany, France, and Sweden, pored over these deleted comments to decide whether they were legal or illegal. In effect, these legal experts assumed a role that does not belong to them. They positioned themselves as courts and judges, delivering verdicts on speech without the authority or the procedure of either. And therein lies the problem. Just because a legal expert says that something is illegal, in their opinion, doesn't make it illegal. It just makes it allegedly illegal according to a legal expert. And any serious legal expert will tell you that whether a post is illegal is a question to be argued in court and decided by a judge. At most, such a legal expert can offer an opinion, and a responsible legal expert will emphasize that until a court rules otherwise, what they personally consider illegal remains in fact legal. But the legal experts the study consulted seem perfectly fine with the study taking their word as God's own truth. This is ridiculous, to say the least. We all know how lawyers and legal experts operate. Ask 10 legal experts a question and you will get 11 different opinions and answers. Disagreement is the legal profession's native language. If that is so, then the Future of Free Speech must have relied on very few legal experts indeed to determine which posts were illegal. Otherwise, a neat consensus on the number and amount of illegal comments would have been impossible. But this study could not have employed 2 legal experts, since that gives you 3 different irreconcilable opinions on what counts as illegal content. Even employing 1 legal expert gives you 2 differing opinions on whether something is allegedly illegal or not, or illegal or not. Therefore, we are left with only one possible conclusion. The Future of Free Speech must have consulted a negative number of legal experts, namely precisely -2. -2 legal experts must have been used in order to arrive at a single unanimous opinion on what counts as illegal content. It is an impressive methodological breakthrough. At the very least, one must concede that it keeps research costs rather low. And what, in the end, are legal experts good for? Does everyone remember those German state prosecutors on the infamous 60 Minutes TV episode, casually chuckling as they described people's homes being searched and raided and their phones being confiscated over social media comments? If that is the spirit in which illegal speech is pursued, one begins to wonder how much reassurance legal expertise is supposed to provide. What if the Future of Free Speech had consulted these German state prosecutors? I suspect they would have discovered far more so-called illegal content in their analyzed samples. After all, Facebook's and YouTube's legal experts seem remarkably adept at finding so-called illegal content themselves, which conveniently explains why they managed to delete so much of it under the DSA. If any of these legal experts who worked on the study objected to having their opinions presented as though they were judicial determinations if they protested the portrayal of posts as illegal independently of court judgments. I have certainly not heard of this protest. Their silence, if silence it be, is telling. Since the study is still out there on the internet, either they seem comfortable with their conjectures being treated as verdicts, or these legal experts see no problem in blurring the line between professional opinion and binding judgments. Neither option inspires much confidence. All right then. We have established that the comments analyzed were deemed illegal as such only by so-called legal experts of questionable reliability. In other words, they are merely allegedly illegal. And if they are merely allegedly illegal, then they are legal by definition. That, then, is the first reason this study is bogus. Very bogus. The study presents itself as an empirical investigation into the prevalence of illegal content on the internet, as though it were measuring an objective reality rather than circulating opinions. Indeed, this study claims that it, quote, seeks to empirically test the validity of strongly held convictions about the widespread proliferation of illegal hate speech on the internet, end quote. Yet, what it actually measures is not illegal content as determined by courts, but content labeled illegal by experts, which is precisely the sleight of hand on which this entire bogus exercise depends. So, this is not empirical at all. Alleging illegality is mere supposition. It is a priori hypothesizing, masquerading as data. It is speculation, nothing more. An empirical investigation into whether these comments are actually illegal would require examining whether any court has found them to be illegal. That is, looking to concrete judgments in which these specific posts were held to violate the law. Anything short of that is not empirical inquiry, but armchair conjecture. That is precisely why this study is pseudoscientific. It claims to be empirical, yet it rests on a priori speculation about what might be illegal. On that basis, it possesses no validity, neither legally, because no court has ruled on the posts in question under the DSA, nor scientifically, because it fails to meet the empirical standard it so confidently invokes. The reasoning the future of free speech used to determine which comments are legal was flawed from the outset. In other words, legality was treated as a matter of professional intuition. It is difficult to imagine a more ridiculous foundation for a study that claims empirical rigor. And the truly amusing part is that the study seems perfectly aware that it is practicing pseudoscience when it classifies posts as illegal without any court judgment. The study does not even conceal the maneuver. On the contrary, it openly admits it. I quote from the study, quote, applying criminal law provisions intended for judging human behavior in a court of law and after all relevant facts have been investigated to pieces of content with little to no opportunity to further investigate relevant facts or a speaker's intent requires some modulation, end quote. Ah, yes. Declaring allegedly illegal posts to be illegal requires some modulation when there is little to no opportunity to establish the speaker's intent or the relevant facts pertaining to a deleted comment. In other words, the courtroom process where facts are examined, intent is tested, and arguments are heard is consciously set aside. In its place, we are offered armchair legal experts performing some modulation, which is a polite way of describing legally irrelevant mental gymnastics perfumed as rigor. But the problems with the study do not end there. So, between 87.5% and 99.7% of all deleted comments, depending on the sample in this report, are in fact legal. Oh my. Pause for a moment and consider that range. It is brushing right up against 100%. And what does the study call the deletion of almost exclusively legal content? It calls it an unintended consequence or an unintended effect. Why is it an unintended consequence? Because the study assumes that the purpose of the DSA is to censor illegal content. That is the study's premise. Well, yes, that follows logically. If the purpose of the DSA is intended to censor illegal content, then its almost exclusive deletion of legal content would qualify as an unintended consequence. More than that, it would amount to a monumental blunder of epic proportions, the kind of outcome one expects only from catastrophic incompetence. But there is a deeper problem. Look. If your premise is that the DSA censors illegal content, and you then discover that almost all of the content it censors is legal, the obvious response is to question your premise. When the facts collide head-on with your starting premise, it is the premise, not the facts, that is supposed to give way and yield. Indeed, that is how science is supposed to work. In science and academia, especially when conducting an empirical investigation, you are bound by the principle of falsifiability. A theory must be capable of being disproven by the evidence. In this case, the study's own results, showing that legal content is being deleted on a massive scale, falsify the theory that the DSA exists to censor illegal content. If the data contradict the theory so directly, the scientific response is not to relabel the outcome an unintended consequence, but to acknowledge that the theory itself and its premise have failed and have been falsified. It is obvious. The future of free speech should have revised its premise. Faced with findings showing that almost all deleted content is legal, it should have considered the possibility that the DSA's purpose is not to censor illegal content at all, but to censor legal content. At the very least, the study should have raised the possibility as a serious alternative explanation. But it did not even consider that its premise might be false. That possibility is not even raised. So, their premise that the DSA's purpose is to censor illegal content fails to explain why it deletes so much legal content. A theory that cannot account for the very phenomenon it observes is not much of a theory at all. The only explanation that actually fits the massive rate of legal comments being deleted is the uncomfortable theory that the purpose of the DSA is, in fact, to censor legal comments. Let's dig deeper into this mess of a study. The study concludes that, quote, over-removal of legal content may be a bigger problem than under-removal of illegal content, end quote. That is pretty funny if you stop to think about it. A study that finds that almost 100% of the censored comments it analyzed are legal then says that censoring too much legal content may be a bigger problem than censoring illegal content. Maybe. Just maybe. As though the deletion of overwhelmingly legal speech leaves room for suspense about which problem is the larger. The studied uncertainty is almost impressive. Absurd barely begins to cover it. Incidentally, the deletion of genuinely illegal content, i.e. content actually found illegal by courts, is already addressed by pre-existing national laws. In other words, there were mechanisms in place long before the DSA to deal with speech that courts ruled to be illegal. The DSA, therefore, redundantly commands the deletion of illegal content that national laws already cover. And that redundancy points, once again, to the obvious conclusion. The true function of the DSA is not to censor illegal content, but to censor legal content. With that, the study has just introduced two key concepts. Firstly, the concept of over-removal of legal content, or what is commonly referred to as overblocking, and secondly, the concept of the under-removal of illegal content. The study defines over-removal as a better safe than sorry approach, where companies like Facebook remove more content than necessary due to the threat of significant fines. Over-removal of legal content is precisely what the study calls an unintended consequence of the DSA. What the study is saying is that the deletion of almost exclusively legal content is the censorship of more content than the law requires. Well, that is nonsense. Since the DSA only censors legal posts and nothing but legal posts, the censorship of nothing but legal posts is not censoring more than required. Its censorship of legal content, in whatever amounts, is exactly what the law requires. There is no upper limit to this logic. If legal comments that are merely alleged to be illegal must be censored, then every comment on the internet can be censored under the DSA so long as someone alleges illegality. The trigger for deletion of content is a mere allegation. And the fact that the DSA can, in theory, be used to deny the public access to platforms like Facebook for repeated violations only drives the point home. Shutting down an entire platform is nothing less than the deletion of all legal content hosted on such a platform. You see what is happening here. The concept of over-removal is a deception. It is EU propaganda, a carefully chosen term that reframes the issue before the debate has even begun. It suggests excess, as though the problem were merely that the system had gone a little too far. But if the system is built to censor legal content, then there is no over or under about it. The outcome is not accidental spillover but structural design. That is why the language matters. The phrase over-removal functions as narrative management. Yes, narrative management. But why? Well, first of all, the concept of over-removal, or overblocking, rests on the idea that too many legal comments are being censored. It presupposes a meaningful distinction between legal and illegal comments as separate categories of content subject to deletion under the DSA. But that distinction is precisely what we are calling in question. If in practice, all censored comments are legal unless and until a court rules otherwise, then the supposed contrast between legal and illegal content disappears and collapses. The concept of overblocking, therefore, depends on a distinction that the DSA itself does not genuinely sustain. It is a fake distinction, this distinction between legal and illegal content, because the DSA can only censor legal comments. If no court has ruled a comment illegal, then it remains legal, full stop. Under those conditions, the notion of overblocking, again, collapses. You cannot delete too many legal comments when legal comments are the only kind the DSA is capable of censoring. Overblocking, in that sense, does not exist under the DSA. It is logically impossible. Second, the concept of overblocking necessarily understates and underplays the scale of the problem. Mchangama's study illustrates this perfectly. It describes the deletion of between 87.5% and 99.7% of legal content as overblocking. But that framing already minimizes what is happening, because the true figure is higher. If no court has ruled any of the comments illegal, then 100% of the deleted content is legal. Calling it overblocking suggests excess at the margins. The reality is totality and all-encompassing censored legality. Conversely, the content the study labels illegal but which was not found in sufficient quantities is framed as an under-removal of illegal content. That description flatters the DSA by implying that it successfully removes genuinely illegal material and merely fails to remove enough of it. But this overstates the law's positive effects. It assumes that the category of illegal content identified by jurists corresponds to content actually found illegal by courts. In doing so, it creates the impression that genuinely illegal content was being removed from the internet, when in fact that conclusion rests on nothing more than false opinion. But since this so-called illegal content was, by definition, legal under the DSA, no court having ruled otherwise, there was no under-removal of illegal content at all. The number of genuinely illegal comments identified in the study and actually deleted and censored was precisely 0. To suggest that too few illegal comments were removed therefore exaggerates the DSA's success. It did not remove some illegal comments, and not enough. It removed 0 illegal comments. I will repeat this because it matters. The fiction of over-removal of legal comments understates the problem the DSA creates. Meanwhile, the fiction of the under-removal of illegal comments exaggerates the supposed benefits of the DSA. The fiction of over-removal, or over-blocking, suggests an excess of deleted legal comments, a system that has gone slightly too far. But that framing obscures the dark reality. The problem is not that too much legal content is being censored. The problem is that only legal content is being censored as such. Meanwhile, the fiction of the under-removal of illegal comments implies that the law successfully deletes illegal content, but not quite enough of it. Yet the only genuine benefit would be the deletion of content actually found illegal by courts, and that, under the DSA, as applied here, cannot happen. The promise of removing illegal content is held up as proof of success, even though no such removal has occurred. And with that, the study's aim comes into focus. It fits neatly into the EU's preferred narrative. If between 87.5 and 99.7% of the content the DSA censors is problematic, because too much legal content is being removed, then the issue can be framed as one of calibration. The DSA is not fundamentally flawed, it simply needs refinement. Improvement is possible, progress is attainable, the premise remains intact, and so does the DSA. Future studies could then report improvement, perhaps finding that only 60% of censored content is now legal. The number can be adjusted downward at leisure, presented as evidence of steady progress. In this way, critics of the DSA can be soothed with the reassuring fantasy that the law is merely imperfect, that it can be fine-tuned, calibrated, and responsibly reformed. And this obscures the central point. Whether 60%, 1% or 99% of deleted comments are classified as legal makes no difference at all. By definition, 100% of them are legal unless and until a court rules otherwise. The shifting percentages creates the illusion of shifts in proportional legality, as though the problem were a matter of degree. But that arithmetic is a distraction and a deception. It is fake proportional legality, designed to obscure the simple fact that it is all legal content. Jacob Mchangama is telling us, in effect, that the DSA itself is not the problem. Rather, the DSA merely has problems that can be identified, adjusted, and fixed. On this view, the system is fundamentally sound and good. It simply requires reform and amelioration. In our last video, we established a basic point. Illegal content does not exist independently of a court judgment. Until a court rules, there is no illegality, but only legal content. Likewise, allegedly illegal content does not exist independently of an alleger. Remove the person making the allegation, and the allegedly illegal content is no longer allegedly illegal content. Therefore, the DSA cannot coherently be implemented, cannot be implemented at all, because it assumes that posts are illegal or allegedly illegal in and of themselves, independently of any court judgment or identifiable alleger. It treats illegality and alleged illegality as an intrinsic property of a post, rather than as the outcome of a legal process or an accusation or an allegation. On that assumption, the DSA rests on something, the belief in something, which does not exist. And so, since the things it bans do not exist, you cannot apply the law. This is equivalent to a law commanding that witches are to be burnt at the stake. Witches do not exist, so such a law cannot be implemented in any rational sense. Unless, of course, you believe in witches. In that case, you will have no difficulty finding witches and burning plenty of them. And now, Jacob Mchangama is basically telling us that too little illegal content and too much legal content is being censored. You know, Lewis Carroll wrote a book called Sylvie and Bruno. In that book, a crowd gathers and shouts a slogan in protest. It is a slogan which demands less of what sustains life and more of what burdens it. They shout something absurd. Their slogan is, less bread, more taxes. Less bread, more taxes. It gets things gloriously, unmistakably backwards. And now Jacob Mchangama is shouting, burn less women, burn more witches. Burn less women, burn more witches. This forgets that all witches are women by definition. If you boil it down right to its core, this is what Mr. Mchangama is really saying. Let us not burn any women at all, let us just burn witches. This demand pretends there is a distinction between witches and women when there is not. Both parts are the exact same demand. It is the very counterfeit of nuance. The notion of overburning, which implies that you are burning too many women than the law requires, necessarily understates the problem. The problem is that you are burning women as such, not that you are burning too many of them. Period. The notion of underburning of witches overstates the benefits of the law that commands you to burn witches, because you are not burning any witches at all. You are simply burning women. Like the crowd in Lewis Carroll's book, Mchangama is shouting, censor less legal content, censor more illegal content, censor less legal content, censor more illegal content. What this actually means is that he is chanting the following: censor less legal content, censor more legal content, censor less legal content, censor more legal content. It is mistaken, absurd, and ridiculous. The EU would prefer that we squabble over how many witches are burned each year, debating whether fewer witches should be burned, whether there is a proper number of witches to burn, and how many women ought mercifully to be spared. The quarrel is carefully framed as one of quantity and degree, but the premise that witches exist to be burned and ought to be burned goes unquestioned. And the study refers to critics of the DSA, noting that, quote, the regulation, the DSA, has been criticized for not adequately safeguarding and addressing freedom of expression. End quote. That formulation is revealing. It presumes that even the DSA's critics accept that the DSA is sound in principle and merely deficient in practice. Critics like Jacob Mchangama, on this account, do not reject the framework of the DSA itself. They assume it is fundamentally good and simply needs modification to protect freedom of expression more adequately. But what Mchangama, or Mchangama, does not mention are critics like Norman Lewis, managing director of the Futures Diagnosis and a visiting research fellow at MCC Brussels, who argues that the very day the DSA was passed into law was, quote, the day that freedom of speech died on the internet. That is a fundamental indictment and condemnation of the DSA. Yet Mr. Mchangama confines his attention to critics of the DSA who accept the framework and merely question its calibration. Critics who reject the premise altogether are quietly left out of view. Very interesting. This study, by the Future of Free Speech, conducted within the period that Facebook and YouTube had to implement the DSA, functions essentially as an attempt to frame the debate in the terms the EU would prefer. By presenting the issue as one of overblocking and under-removal, it channels criticism into questions of adjustment and proportionality. In doing so, it obscures the fundamental problem of the DSA itself. It does this by introducing the fictitious distinction, the artificial distinction, between legal and illegal content. Once you see through that deception, the authoritarian logic becomes clear. The fiction of too much censorship necessarily understates the scale of what is actually happening, because it treats the deletion of legal speech as an excess rather than as the core problematic practice. Conversely, the idea of too little censorship exaggerates the supposed benefits of the DSA, implying that genuinely illegal content is being removed, just not in sufficient quantities. Both concepts distort reality in opposite directions, and both serve the same purpose: to make the DSA appear adjustable and palatable, as opposed to indefensible. The EU and the social media companies operating under the dominion of the DSA may burn as many witches as they like, casting themselves as the witch-finder generals. And critics like Mr. Mchangama step forward as the moderate witch-finders, dutifully chanting, "Burn less women, burn more witches." The posture is one of restraint under the principle of a superstitious inquisition engaged in a witch hunt against hate speech and legal content. We need to resist this. We need to recognize that no women should be burned, no legal content ought to be censored, and if the DSA in practice and in theory censors only legal content and nothing but legal content, then the conclusion follows plainly. The DSA ought to be abolished in its entirety and immediately. The importance of this cannot be overstated. The future of free speech itself insists that, quote, "It is crucial to comprehend the legal foundation underpinning freedom of expression and its associated boundaries," end quote. It goes on to speak of the boundaries of free expression set by national laws and of national criminal law provisions becoming stricter and being shifted by the DSA. No. The DSA does not shift the boundaries of free expression. It does not merely redraw the lines around what can and cannot be said. It dissolves these boundaries altogether. It censors legal content despite its legality, invoking criminal law as a justification while disregarding the very concept of courtroom judgments that give that law meaning. Because a law defining what is illegal cannot by definition forbid that which is allowed. That is a fundamental principle. The criminal law does not forbid that which is allowed. Once legality is severed from judicial determination, the boundaries of free expression are erased to destroy it. The EU's DSA treats content as illegal independently of a court judgment. That is a principle of a society where everything is illegal until it has been permitted, where everyone is guilty until found innocent. It is a totalitarian society. At least the Swiss DSA censors only, and formally speaking, only allegedly illegal content, which is legal by definition, and so still upholds the principle that everything is legal until it has been forbidden. The twist, however, is that under the Swiss DSA, the censored legal comments will simply never be declared to be illegal. It's the fatuous compliment the Swiss DSA pays to democracy. That the future of free speech does not understand the meaning of free speech, but knows well that laws like the DSA censor only legal content, becomes evident when it discusses the German law known as the Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, or NetzDG for short. The NetzDG is the German law that served as the precursor to the EU's DSA. Indeed, the DSA can fairly be regarded as a European-wide extension of the German NetzDG, a scaled-up version of the same regulatory model. Mr. Mchangama's study states that, quote, "The NetzDG does not explicitly define what is legal and illegal, but rather sets certain rules for the removal and complaint process regarding illegal content." End quote. So the NetzDG contains no clear, objective definition of what is illegal in the way a criminal code does. Instead of anchoring censorship to judicial determinations under established law, the NetzDG relies on procedural mechanisms and arbitrary platform enforcement. In other words, Mr. Mchangama and his think tank are probably perfectly aware that what is being censored is legal content by definition, because illegality is not explicitly defined under regulatory frameworks like the DSA or the NetzDG. The logic is elementary. Mr. Mchangama and his think tank cannot have missed it, nor can they have overlooked that the alleged illegality their legal experts attribute to certain posts in the study still amounts to nothing but legality by definition. The study says that and I'm quoting, the examination of the German samples of deleted comments shows that they have the lowest proportion of illegal content compared to the Swedish and French samples. The study says this could be directly related to the impact of the German NetzDG on the practices of social media platforms seeking to avoid fines in fear of non-compliance, and that, quote, respectively 99.7% and 98.9% of all deleted comments in the German Facebook and YouTube samples are found to be legal, end quote. Excuse me? The study has just stated that 99.7 to 98.9% of deleted comments in Germany could be related to the NetzDG. When virtually all deleted comments are legal, the connection is not speculative. It is staring you in the face. Have they read serious German critics of the NetzDG? Have they even heard of them? Have they ever heard of the formidable lawyer Joachim Steinhöfel? The only lawyer in Germany who takes companies like Facebook to court for deleting legal content and wins with extraordinary success rates exceeding 90%. If nearly every case he brings results in a judicial ruling that the deleted content was legally permissible, what does that say about the system this study so cautiously describes as merely imperfect? Mr. Steinhöfel says about the NetzDG, quote, I have always, somewhat militaristically, called it the digital mass destruction of free speech. It naturally leads, he continues, to the mass deletion, especially in the grey zone between what is permissible and what is not, of content that must not be deleted. He calls the law unconstitutional. When asked what legal remedy an ordinary citizen actually has against this law, Mr. Steinhöfel replies, quote, none. Your only option is to fight the social media platform if your content is removed and the removal is not justified. End quote. Jacob Mchangama ought to read Mr. Steinhöfel's bestseller, a book called Digital Tutelage, Die digitale Bevormundung in German, which forcefully criticizes legislation such as the Digital Services Act and the NetzDG. Perhaps then Mr. Mchangama would see that the deletion of so much legal content in Germany is not merely possibly a consequence of this kind of legislation, but most certainly a consequence of it. But then again, Mr. Mchangama already knows this. His study states, and I quote, that being said, criminal proceedings and private content moderation are not exact analogues. End quote. Aha, not exact analogues. So even the study knows that content moderation by private companies labeling speech illegal and removing it cannot stand in for criminal proceedings. A moderation decision is not a judicial ruling. And once that distinction is acknowledged, as the study does here, the entire attempt to treat legal expertise at a distance from the courtroom as a proxy for legal judgment unravels and collapses. As to the distinction between criminal proceedings and private content moderation, the study notes that, quote, the former involves the threat of criminal sanctions, including ultimately the risk of prison, whilst the latter merely results in the removal of content or, at worst, the deletion of user accounts, end quote. Aha. So, under the DSA, content is merely removed. Exactly. No court, no conviction, no criminal sanction, just the removal of legal content and its censorship. So why, then, does Mr. Mchangama's think tank treat that removed content as illegal? If they themselves acknowledge that moderation is not a criminal proceeding, on what basis do they assume illegality? You cannot deny the equivalence between criminal proceedings and private content moderation and then rely on it. That is an irreconcilable contradiction. Yes, Mchangama probably knows his study is pseudoscientific nonsense. It frames the debate around the DSA in a way the EU would like it to be framed. It's a framing that maintains censorship by suggesting that a fundamentally censorial system can be maintained and improved simultaneously. Burn less women, burn more witches, censor less legal content, censor more illegal content. But we have seen that the premise that the DSA censors illegal comments leads to all kinds of deceptions. Change the premise and freshly assume that the DSA's purpose is to censor legal content and nothing but legal content, and the concepts of overblocking and under-removal are exposed as fictions. The entire distinction between legal and illegal comments also disappears, to reveal that the emperor has no clothes, and that it is all legal content by definition. You don't need any, this is important, you don't need any studies to investigate how many legal comments the DSA censors. It is not an empirical question. It only censors legal content by design, by definition, and by logical necessity. This is not an empirical matter. It is an a priori insight, derived from reflection alone. The EU has constructed, with the DSA, a framework so fundamentally flawed that it collapses under the weight of first principles alone. The future of free speech's study promises, quote, to bring clarity to the debate about freedom of expression on social media. End quote. Clarity. It wants to establish clarity. Nonsense. It obscures everything. It fogs the glass of genuine criticism. In fact, I allege that it wants to obscure everything. In that sense, it produces exactly what the EU professes to oppose, this information packaged as analysis, and advocacy disguised as neutral research. To top it off, one must really start to wonder. The future of free speech finds that between 87.5% and 99.7% of all deleted comments, depending on the sample in this report, are in fact legal, and calls this an unintended consequence. How much more legal content needs to be deleted until Mchangama's think tank concludes that the deletion of legal content is not a mistake? If 99.7% is insufficient, maybe 100% will lead to a rethink. And we may then wonder the following. The future of free speech makes so many mistakes. How many more mistakes does it need to make before we conclude that the future of free speech is not making a mistake? I will leave that to our audience. In any case, the DSA needs to be abolished as soon as possible. Luckily, we have now determined that empirical studies investigating how much legal content the DSA censors are futile and trivial. Such a study is the equivalent of empirically investigating a sample of bachelors to find out which of these bachelors is unmarried. Bachelors are unmarried by definition. We don't need a study. Triangles have three sides. We don't need an empirical study on that either. And the DSA only censors legal content. That is not a mistake. It is the method and purpose. It only censors legal content by design and by definition. Mchangama's study is unnecessary. It only becomes necessary if you want to make the mistake of believing that some bachelors are married men or that some triangles have 6 sides, and then set about proving that nonsense with data. And once that is understood, we can dispense with the pageantry. No more fake scholarship, no more pseudoscientific exercises in fake data, no more research that launders censorship into reform. End the DSA, and you end the charade that passes for clarity in the service of the censors who run the EU. Now that would be progress. That was me, Andreas Seemann of the Alliance for Free Speech, Bündnis Redefreiheit in German. Thank you very much for listening. It was a rather long video, probably the longest in our DSA series. See you next time. Thank you.